Hello and assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to our event. It's been a little while since we had a live event on this platform, so some of you are familiar, some of you aren't. So we will be having our live, aka Live with Missy, wrong way, Live with Missy. So we are going to be having the conversation about COVID-19 and its effects on school-age children and adolescents. So we all know that we have been indoors during the pandemic, that there have been many different effects on our health, both physically and mentally, but also to the effects on our children within our community. So we thought it was really important to have this conversation because they've now almost had a full year of being inside and not having as much social interaction that they're used to, as it would be if it was pre-COVID. So I'm going to bring some special guests up on the screen because we have some amazing panelists. So the first person I'm going to bring up is Dr. Raymond Brock Murray. So assalamu alaikum, hello.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Hello. Thank you for having me.
Hello. No problem. Next person I'm going to be bringing up is Miss Heather Butts. Hello, Heather.
Hello, how are you?
Good. All right, now I'm going to bring up Miss Tanisha Franks. Hello, Tanisha. I love all the love. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, we have the amazing Sister Haneen Haswa. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. All right. So basically the way today's talk is going to go is that I'm going to ask these lovely people of knowledge, right? Because they know what they're talking about. That's what we brought them here for. They're educators, they're mental health practitioners and professionals. So I'm going to bring up the first question. Let me bring it up here. Boo, 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 boo. As professionals working with children and adolescents, what have you encountered with this population during COVID? So who would like to be my first speaker? Any takers? Anyone excited to get rolling on this? All right, go ahead, Tisha.
Oh.
Hold on, I don't hear your sound. All right, try unmute yourself and mute, and then try muting and then unmuting. Then try it again. Speak. Is your sound you want to maybe test your mic out? Maybe if you should be having there should be an option where you can click edit mic setting. Okay.
I can get started as we kind of figure that out.
Yep. Yes. Thank you, Susani.
Hello. Again, salam alaikum. Thank you for inviting me to this platform to talk about this really important topic. And so last year when the pandemic started, I was an assistant principal at Future Leaders Elementary School. And this year I am the principal of the Harborview School. And I think throughout the pandemic, one of the things that we kept noticing with children is that they were kind of they still are. They're functioning in this system that they don't fully understand, right? So I think towards the beginning, what we were seeing with kids is, okay, so now I'm on a screen. There are limitations in terms of how we can engage, and obviously across time, they got more savvy around the technological part of it, and they're savvy already when it comes to tech. But we were noticing that we were having trouble reaching them in terms of getting them to explain how they feel, because everything was so new and the focus was more around how do you do things for the adults, where the children didn't really have the space to have that one-on-one interaction with teachers, with school leaders, because as elementary schools, we know our kids very well. So I would say one of the things that was most concerning for me is creating the space for kids to be able to say what they think, what they feel, especially when there was a high level of grief in the community, right? A high level of anxiety, a high level of fear. And as parents and educators, across time, we learned how to manage it. And I don't know if we paused to always create that space for our kids. So that's something that is something I think about often as a school leader and as a parent, is how do we create those outlets for kids to share what they feel because it's impactful to their development, and it's impactful to their learning, and it is as important as their learning, because they have to be mentally well to be able to interact with us, and interact with their communities. So I would say that that would be the thing that pops to mind, like just that, creating those spaces to highlight how they feel and what we can do to support them.
Thank you, Haneen, for saying that. Because, like, I mean, I've seen this because I do work with kids in certain areas throughout the pandemic, and it is weird for them, right? Trying to learn like a different way of interacting that they may have done before, because it's not like they haven't interacted with each other through virtual means, but having it where it's kind of like a forced thing, where it's like they don't have any other option. This is the only option they can really properly interact with their classmates or their friends or even like family members and stuff like that. So that does make a lot of sense. Does anybody want to add to that or piggyback on what Haneen just said?
Yeah. Sorry, Dr. You want to go first?
Please.
Okay, I'll be brief. I just wanted to echo what was just said, and also, it's really fascinating in the era of COVID because we have certain students who obviously are struggling from a mental health perspective. We have students that are struggling in terms of social dynamics. Also, just academically, they're having difficulties. And that I've also seen something really interesting. So we have a virtual soccer program at Health for Youths. That's the nonprofit I'm the co-founder of. And we have a new cadre of students, a new cohort of students who are basically learning soccer skills virtually in a way that they probably would have had a difficult time doing before, because they get a lot of individual attention, and we work with them very closely. So there's some gains that we're seeing with some of the students in that we're able to focus very carefully on some of the students we're working with, mainly because we have the ability, but a lot of other students just are having a really difficult time making the transition to the virtual world. And this isn't anything that is new for parents, I'm sure, but it's been just really challenging in that way for those students. So some students are finding some gains, especially in specific areas like that, and we're doing coding and robotics programming, and so they're able to focus and have a quiet space around them. But for a lot of other students, it's just very, very challenging and difficult.
Thank you for adding on to that. And that sounds very interesting, like a virtual soccer program, like how that would work, right? Because that's such like a physical, it's a contact sport, right? Like it's such a physical, like in-person sport. So that's interesting.
Well, the one thing I will say about that is, the students are at home individually, and we get to work a lot on skills. So yes, it is a contact sport, and normally you're out there with all the other students doing a thing, but because they are at home in a single manner, we get to do a lot of work on drills, on skill sets, on talking about what their skills are, a lot of dynamic work. So it's actually kind of interesting. Saturday nights, 6 p.m. Zoom.
I love the little plug. I love the little plug. Dr. Brockmurray, would you like to add on to that?
Alhamdulillah, just a couple of thoughts, right? First, I think I've been trying to conceptually explain to parents that when COVID hit and everybody went into virtual learning, you have to think of it like your children effectively went to college, right? Like the way that a lot of your learning is self-taught. You have to put forward the effort and the initiative. You can slack if you want to. There's not a lot of like direct accountability. That's all the stuff that people complained about and talked about when COVID hit. And that's really what it's like to be in college. And the reason I try to explain that to parents was to help them understand that that's a serious, significant stressor for not only a college student, but let's say somebody who's in 6th grade. right? Like that kind of learning environment is very, very stressful. And what is compounding that is, usually we expect parents to be able, to the best of their ability, to teach their children how to cope with the stresses that they face in life. Right now, sometimes parents aren't equipped with that because they don't even have those resources themselves. But that becomes especially difficult when you talk about a child who's going through something that no one's ever been through. I mean, the people who have been through a lockdown like this during the Spanish flu are, you know, 90 years old at this point, right? And so no one at the age of the parents of these children has any idea what to do. They're coping along with their children at the same times. And sometimes they don't know how to recognize what their children are going through as being related to, the strains of COVID. But then also because they don't even really necessarily have the tools to cope themselves, their children are doubly at a loss, right? And so those are two things that I wanted to say, at least to encourage parents to seek out help and support around, trying to help their children cope.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Brockberry. And interesting enough that you said that, we actually had someone who mentioned something in the comment section on our Facebook that said, "My daughter is starting high school almost exclusively virtually. While we take the time to ensure we have a robust conversation and interactions, we know the lack of physical interaction is affecting her." So like you did, you all talked about, right, how you're trying to navigate this virtual realm, and you just mentioned, I'll call you Dr. Ray off of the name, Dr. Ray. Having that conversation and making sure that, because they're going along with them, right? 'Cause you just talked about the last people who ever went through this type of lockdown was in like the 1920s. It's like it was pretty long time ago, and they're like in their 90s now. So there is a struggle with trying to, one, have the parents get used to going through this, but also having to assist their children during this time as well. Did you want to add to that, Heather? I saw your mic go off. Oh, great. Let me make sure my mic is good. Okay. So we're going to actually go to the next question. Give me 1 second. Let me switch it. Oh, my laptop is running a little slow. Okay, there we go. So the second question is, what are some of the psychological pitfalls that you're seeing affecting the youth? And this question kind of comes after like what happened like in February. So in February of 2021, 5 public school kids succeeded in their suicides in Staten Island. Although studies from the Journal of American Medical Association has shown that adolescents have a higher rate of self-reporting psychological distress. What are some of the pitfalls that you're seeing affecting the youth? So I don't know if the mental health professional that I know, Dr. Ray, wants to go first, or somebody else wants to go first. I always go straight to him.
No, always ladies first. I'm happy to let the ladies tackle the issue first.
Mm-hmm.
Can I test my mic? How am I doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, your mic is working. Awesome.
You get to go first,
Go ahead.
Tanisha.
Are you sure?
Yes, because you're having mic issues. Go ahead.
So, like you mentioned, adolescence is a really hard time for our students when it's not a pandemic or a global crisis. And so we have to make sure that they're surrounded with supports. And I think this is very tough because we're all in crisis. And some of the things so what we understand is that young people experience a microcosm, right? And so you might have a family who's dealing with job loss or some other major circumstances. And for students, they're in homework holes and they're missing their friends. But that's their microcosm. And so it's hard sometimes for adults to relate to young people and what they're going through because our worlds are expanded. The concept of what it's like to have a mortgage. I don't know what it's like to have a gas bill. So the loss of friendships, the fact that I can't go to prom, those that, that's that's large enough for our young people, for them to feel overwhelmed in the same way that an adult might feel overwhelmed when they have all these other things happening in their world. And so sometimes that's the difficulty with working with, with understanding what's happening with young people, is that they're a microcosm of the world. Whether it's elementary school and the loss of, when you have a situation where students are losing their social environment, or they're unable to like go to the park and things like that's their whole little world. So for them, that's paramount. It's the same as you dealing with the loss of maybe a loved one or a home or some other thing. And so those are the things that are affecting our youth. And then while we're getting better at the concept of children are seen but not heard, and we understand that we need to have space for young people to express themselves, sometimes we're still dealing with a very traditional mindset where young people don't have a space to express themselves, to say, hey, this is hard for me. You hurt my feelings because you were frustrated in your space, which is way larger than mine, and you lashed out on me. That made me feel sad. And so we don't always leave them that space. So where I could call my girlfriend and express all the things that I'm going through, young people sometimes only have their parental space to vent and to receive love from, right? You might have a romantic relationship. Your child's physical contact comes from you. So it's like when you're in a space where you can't provide that because of what you're going through, sometimes we don't see little people in the equation. And so that's what I have been experiencing a lot of.
Thank you for making that point. Well, we made a lot of great points, actually, multiple ones, right? How we can be looking at as adults, or even as seeing you guys like as parents, right? We're focusing so much on like things that we're going on internally that we sometimes don't realize the trickle down effect that it has on the children, right? And that could be a pitfall in of itself, right? And our own ways of attempting not to have our own personal pitfalls, we might cause pitfalls in other areas in our lives or in other aspects for the little peoples, or even our little peoples that aren't so little, because some of them are taller than us, right? That affect them in ways that we don't see, right? Because there are many times where people are like, oh, well, you're just in high school, so what are you so stressed about? Or, you're just this age. Why are you feeling so sad about this? Like you'll get new friends, and you talked about that's their environment. That's all they know up to a certain point. So for them, when something goes wrong in that world, it feels like their whole world can be burning. So I know Haneen wanted to also speak, so I'm gonna bring Haneen. So if you want to speak, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanisha, for sharing those points. I think that when we think about a child's environment, a couple of things come up for me when I think about like just the things that are happening psychologically. I think one of the things that this pandemic highlighted is the gaps in how equitable the world is, right? And you can bring that system all the way down to a department or a school or access to particular things. So I think that, thinking about what's happening in various communities across our city, in different homes across our city, and then just thinking about the collective environment, right? So, how much of the time was spent with the TV on hearing about the number of people that were passing away? How much of the time was spent in really being able to, again, share your feelings, but like Tanisha said, not having the space to do so? And what does that mean for our students with special needs, and what does that mean for our students that already had an issue exploring and expressing who they are, and now have to do that without the support of peers that look like them, or community members, or even like grandparents, right? I was listening to a book the other day, and My Beloved World, and just thinking about who's my person. I might not be able to get to my person. I might have that one person that when I see them, they make everything better for me. And I might not be able to get to that person because of their age, or because of, various things that were happening, especially at the height of the pandemic. So I think a lot about what our collective environment is, and what we're exposing our students to, and what are those conversations, because as adults, hearing about various people who lost their fight with COVID, and the way families and communities were affected, I think has had an effect on our students. But I don't know that we've created the space for them to grieve. So I'm always thinking about, again, spaces and ways that we can engage students. And, we need to think about, as we, start to think about a more normal school year, hopefully next year, fingers crossed, how do we support the level of grief and the level of trauma that students have been under, because we've also been there. So it's hard, like what Dr. Ray said, like we don't have the tools sometimes. So it's kind of like we need the tools, but we need the tools yesterday to be able to work with students, right? So I'm continuously thinking about how our social workers can support families, and what we can do to really get to the source of challenges in that child's immediate environment. But I think the environment is not just the lack of students, it's about the news, and it's about what's happening in the community, what's happening in the neighborhood, what's happening in the home, really considering grief, because you lose a person, right? And that's a tremendous amount of grief that you hold. So imagine families that have lost multiple people, or have had the fear of losing people, because I think that's also very real to kids. Maybe the person made it, but there was like 2 weeks of being really, really afraid that they won't make it. So, just thinking about the collective environment is something that that I think we should consider across the board.
Thank you, Haneen, and I will get to you, Heather, because I know I saw that excited hand you had there. Because, and it's true, right? So many different things can affect us as people, and I'm sure everyone that's listening, and also us here on the panel, know this, right? Just having the fear of potentially losing somebody, right, can be extremely detrimental, and can affect both our physical and our mental health. So thank you for mentioning that, and also just having space to feel these feelings and not feel like we have to have them bottled up inside is also really important. Heather.
Yeah, I just two things I wanted to say, and they touch on what all the speakers have said. One, there's a really interesting study out of Italy that looks at the psychology of school-age children, COVID, and some of the outcomes. And the number one determinant for how a child of school age will fare during COVID is it's not the environment they're in, it's not what they saw on TV, it's none of that. It's how their parents are responding to COVID. It's the number one determinant. It basically trumps everything else. And so if the article gave a really good example of if, for example, you are a parent and you are stressed, and part of your stress is that you're spending so much time with your children and you're not enjoying that time, right? So there's just a lot of time with the children and you're not enjoying the time, then children will not only pick up on that, but it becomes a source of stress for them that, oh, my guardian, my mom, my dad, my grandparent isn't actually enjoying spending time with me. So that can become very stressful. Or just, the parent is stressed because they're not sure what they're going to do in terms of dinner, or they're not sure they have food insecurities. Whatever the stressors are for the parents become the stressors for the children, and it's the number one determinant for that. So I think this is an interesting question because it really speaks not only to the psychological pitfalls that we're seeing in youth, but also that we're seeing in families. And by making sure that the entire family is taken care of, it shows that the people in the family will be taken care of. And the only other thing I wanted to add was, trauma and post-traumatic stress are interesting because we used to think that PTSD came from having traumas that were of an unusual nature. Now we know that that's not the case, that people can suffer from trauma that are tragic, but that happen regularly. COVID, for better or worse, unfortunately, has now become the norm. So now COVID is what people face on a daily basis, and it's horrible. And so to the extent that day in, day out, children are experiencing something that has become normalized tragically and horribly, that is a recurrent trauma for children on a minute by minute, second by second basis. And so long after the COVID era is over, we need to be prepared to be able to work with young people on the 14, 15, 18-month trauma that they have lived day in and day out. And we need to make sure that our mental health infrastructure is ready to support that. So I think that's the next sort of thing that we have to gear up for, is to be ready for that.
Thank you so much, Heather, for mentioning. You guys are such great panelists. That's why we love having you guys. Because you mentioned some really important parts, and even to the extent that people in our comment sections are making, important things they're talking about, like with the dinner choices, right? Like one person literally said dinner choices, daily struggle, right? Because it's like, what is this world? Yeah, they always said daily struggle.
But pick up on that. If mommy's always worried about what we're going to have for dinner, then dinner's not fun anymore. Dinner is very traumatic and very stressful, and the whole family feels it.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree with that. Dr. Ray, do you want to add on anything?
No, you guys are doing very, very well. I'm equally as stressed.
Always so modest. So we will head on over to our next question. Let me move on over to here. But before that, I do want to really mention really quickly, right? So some of us have all heard the term burnout, or maybe sometimes we haven't, right? So burnout is like a state of an emotional, physical, mental exhaustion caused by excessive or prolonged stress, right? It could also occur when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and you may not be able to meet like constant demand. So like you're just kind of like letting the oil burn until there's no more candle, right? So with this question that you guys see below, right, are there any differences in school age children undergoing burnout, like in comparison to like professionals or adults or anything like that? So who would like to take the torch first? All right, Dr. Ray.
Okay, I'm just going to try to make this brief. I think that the one thing that comes to mind for me is we have to be careful mistaking burnout in children as just their normal irritability, right? Sometimes we have this conception that children nag and make trouble. And so when they're nagging and making trouble, we're seeing that just as that's what children do. They're just being themselves. Whereas it might be that the children don't have the language to express what they're going through, and don't have any other like emotional mechanisms for it. And so what you're seeing sometimes, to use the psychological word, is you're seeing the children decompensating, right? Like there's the resources that they have as children are overwhelmed, or they've been overused. They've been trying to be patient, however they've been trying, right? And that might have worked in the beginning, but day 1, day 2, day 3, month 4, month 9, you know, the traction on the wheels is starting, the treads on the wheels are starting to wear thin. And again, to as parents, as teachers and administrators, to be inquisitive. And I'm sure everybody, you know, alhamdulillah, it seems like everybody is trying to be cognizant, but I know that there are some schools administrators, parents, teachers, you know, some of us, we overlook it. We get lost in ourselves, caught up in our reaction. We have certain stereotype thinking that we have about some of our students. And so when we see them and they're struggling, we just say, oh, that's so and so being the way that they are, or what have you. And sometimes it might be that they're doing the same old thing, but for very different and new reasons. And so I just want to kind of point that out for people, because the burnout can look exactly like their bad attitude looked when everything was fine.
No, you make I'm gonna fix this so we like this. No, you make some really good points, right? Because like sometimes we're like, that's just them, right? And we even do it for us as like adults or teenagers, you know, oh, that's just them, right? We don't see it as, okay, that's part of themselves, especially as little kids, because they have a difficulty expressing themselves. Like, this is them expressing themselves. This is them trying to say like, hey, I am having a really hard time. I am burning out. I am struggling. I am smoldering. I am on fire. Help me, right? But because it's not that direct, right? Because they're little, they're younger, even as teenagers too. Like, they have a difficulty expressing certain things, you know, about themselves. We see it as like, okay, why are you stressing out so much, or why are you giving, this is not such a big deal,
Correct.
or different things like that. And to even add on to that too, like, you know, because I know you have a foundation, Dr. Ray, that you keep forgetting to talk
Yes.
about. And, you know, with that, I know you do a couple of things for different people within the community in essence of their mental health needs.
Yes. And so yes, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Mhm.
You know, we, number one, we do counseling, right, for parents and families and children who are in need. But then we also do consultation around issues like this. We'll come in and train the staff, sit with the administrators, doing a needs assessment of the institution. You know, going through all of that, and from the mental health perspective, right? Like, what needs and resources, what weak spots and blind spots do you have? What are your strengths that we can help you maximize, and so on. And so yes. But I just want to make one other comment. I wasn't expecting you to bring that up, so I think I forgot my comment. um, oh
Sorry.
no, here's what I wanted to say. Um, it can be important for us to give the children the language, right? Because giving them the language gives them the language, number one. But then number two, it gives them permission to talk about something, right? And it normalizes it. And then number three, it shows children that we are attuned to their emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not only am I giving you the words for you to express what you're going through, um, but I'm giving you permission to use those words with me, meaning I want to hear it from you. I'm not unconcerned with what you're going through. I'm validating it. But then number three, I'm paying so much attention to you that I'm not feeling around in the dark with what's going on. I'm asking you, right, what's going on. You know, when you were making your comment, I was reminded, my wife went out the other day. My daughter, she's 2.5. And, you know, she looks sad, and you know, she's kind of wiping tears. And I'm like, you know, what's wrong? You know, Birdie, what's wrong? What's wrong? And she's like, you know, let's shake, you know, nothing. What's wrong, Birdie? Let's shake. So, you know, I said to her, you know, do you miss mama? And she's like, yes. And then, you know, she comes over and I pick her up. And so sometimes, you know, giving children the permission to say, like, I see it, I know what's going on, I'm not guessing, I'm concerned with your feelings, I can step into your shoes. That is, you know, part of the emotional intelligence that will help children learn how to cope with the very difficult circumstances. Knowing, you talked about research earlier, knowing that they have someone in their corner, just even having one person who's a mentor or a social support who's older, um, contributes significantly to someone's future success. And so I just wanted to give that advice that popped in my head as I heard you talking.
Thank you so much for for giving that advice. And also too, the name of his foundation is the 5 Before 5.
Yes, the 5 Before 5 Foundation. Sorry, the Five
It's
Before Five
okay.
Foundation. The 5before5.com. Please take a look. God willing, we have a lot of content up. We have all kinds of videos, self-help stuff, and interviews and all of that, and also we have psychology in color, because the 5 Before 5 is geared heavily towards Muslims, but psychology in color is for all communities from all different nationalities, colors, creeds, backgrounds, all of that stuff. So, we're building. We have a team of counselors and lots of media stuff going on. So please check us out. Thank you.
No problem. We have you guys here, yes, as professionals, but also as resources, right, for our community to be aware of what's here, because it's a struggle sometimes finding the things that we need. Does anybody want to add on to anything that Dr. Ray said? Haneen, yes?
I really appreciate the needs assessment piece. I appreciate the, stopping to identify as school communities or as organizations, where do we go from here? I think that when we think about professionals and when we think about children and how burnout manifests, I think that, like we said, adults are more able for the majority of the time. I think teachers are going through a lot. And I think because they're teachers, they're used to being caregivers. So they're not used to having someone else care for them. So I think that's been something that I've noticed with our professionals in the schools, and trying to really create spaces, because our teachers have to be well to be able to do what they do for our kids, and they're doing amazing work, right? And we need to take care of them. And I think when we think about children and burnout, I think of myself as an adult, when I have those days where it's Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, by the end of the day, I haven't really physically done anything, but I'm so exhausted and burnt out from the day, right? So, and even like thinking about this whole platform of learning remotely, and now your child is in college, as Dr. Ray spoke about at the beginning of our talk, I think especially the students that have been home for over a year, that burnout is about so many different areas, right? It's about those Zoom meetings. It's about the lack of seeing my friend. It's about what's happening in the community or in the home. And I think one of the pieces of advice that I've been giving to parents in our community is be comfortable making a choice that's good for your child. If today is not going to be a good day for Zoom, and I'm not advocating that children don't, come on for school if they're remote, but I'm saying sometimes you need to take a day for you to spend the day with your child doing other things that are also going to end up being learning experiences, because, you're doing things and you're engaging, and anytime you're out and about, you're learning. So I think parents should feel comfortable to say, you know what? We're not going to do this today. Today, we're going to take a mental health day or a fun day or a whatever day, however you want to label it. And we're going to do some of the things that I know my children enjoy, because I can see that they're at the absolute limit and we need a break. And at the end of the day, you are your child's parent. You know them better than anyone else knows them. And you have the right to take that pause. And you should take that pause, and you should plan for days that are, and if they can happen on the weekends, it's great. And then they can re-energize. But if you're seeing a point of real high stress, it's not good for them. It's not good for them. And at that high level of stress, they're not learning. They're there, but they're not learning. So we need to listen, not only with our ears, listen with our hearts, listen with our eyes, and just look out for those signs of, changing the course a little bit for their well-being and for the well-being of your family.
Thank you so much for mentioning all the things that you just said, right? So like the overall well-being, being be okay, right? That it's okay to take time out. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to, like, you know what, we need to take a day where we just do stuff that's fun, that we engage with and stuff like that. And I already see you, Dr. Ray. I see you. Go ahead.
I just want to say one thing to what Sister Haneen said. Parents, that means you got to get over your own stuff too, right? Because there's, you know, I'm very grateful to God. I'm helping a lot of parents who seem to be struggling with their own fears and anxieties that have been exacerbated by COVID. And so because of that, they've become very restrictive on their children. And so not only does that contribute to the burnout, but it exacerbates the burnout because they won't let them just go to the park and sit around and socialize even with their own siblings, right? And so, you know, it's very important as parents to seek out help if you need it, to talk to someone who can help you overcome your anxieties and to help you identify strategies to help your children cope and options for them to be able to get out where you can kind of tolerate your safety concerns.
Thank you so much. And you're right. Sometimes we gotta get over some of our own things, right? Like some of the things that we have going on. All right, Heather, let me bring you on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that and say, you know, we talk a lot as adults about self-care, right? But children are at a disadvantage to adults because children usually can't just take themselves off to, you know, the local restaurant or the salon or the wherever. They just can't, I'm going for my self-care day. See you later. And it's in COVID, they absolutely can't do that. So this is actually something to think about in, you know, after COVID and even now during COVID. And it goes to what several of the panelists were talking about, which is, I think we need to be really cognizant as adults and those who teach. You know, I'm a teacher, I'm a professor. So those of us who have young people in our midst, to really think about how sometimes a coping mechanism for an adult might be some of what I just described, or some behaviors that are, you know, not great. But a lot of times with young people, their coping mechanism or you know, their way to soothe might be some of the acting out that we're talking about. And so I think before we sort of just readily chastise that or take it as something that we want to punish the children for, I think stepping back and saying to ourselves, what outlets do my children have? And because they are children, they have a lot less ability to self-actualize and have self-care and take themselves off. And then think about how you, as a parent, can help with that. I think that can make a world of difference. And it goes to what Dr. Ray was talking about too, in terms of, you know, parents really need to take care of themselves in order to, it's like in the airplane, right? When the mask comes down, you got to put on yourself first, then put it on the child. Parents have to put their mask on first and make sure that they are where they need to be, because if they're running on empty, they really have nothing else to give to their children, and children notice that. That's because, you know, your parents, your guardians are children's everything. So they notice it.
Thank you so much. And I love the airplane reference, right? Because we talk a lot about like doing, like giving, right? But we forget to give to ourselves first, at least saving something for ourselves first. And I think that trickles down to like kids, right? They see mommy or they see daddy like just constantly giving, but they don't save any for themselves, and they wonder to themselves, well, that's what they're doing. Maybe that's what I have to do too. Maybe I don't need to take like a day off when I say I'm tired. Right. Or even listening to them when they say, you know what, I'm really tired. I don't want to do this. Sometimes they're faking the funk. Right. And they're just like, oh, me. Right. And then sometimes they're like, no, I am outstretched. I am outsourced. The thing you're asking me to do right now, if I try to do it, I'm going to fall straight on my face. And we've seen children fall asleep in many different locations that just seem odd, right? Because once their body stops, they stop moving. It doesn't matter, you know, where they're at. So just they know first and foremost when they're burning out, right? We know about burnout. We know how our bodies feel. It's just that as we get older, we adapted or have learned this habit of ignoring that burnout, ignoring that message from our bodies and from our minds that, hey, there's way too much going on right now and I need to take time out. And we're always like, no, it's okay. I'll push this. Just keep pushing. You're gonna make it. Do you want to add anything onto that, Tanisha? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Yes, yes, yes. So I think so much has been said. I think what we're really bringing out in this moment is that we are models for our children and they watch us. And so the way that you handle stress becomes the way that you speak to them, and the way that you speak becomes their own internalized voice, the inner voice in their head. And so we always have to be conscious that fact that our children are always watching us. So, it's one thing to say you should do this, if you should do this and I'm doing this. So like you should not be so bogged down by what's happening right now. And then you see me bogged down. It's like a crisscross in messaging. And so sometimes it's very hard for us to actually identify the fact that not only are we living life, but we are living life as models. And so when we think about what we want our children to be able to do as they enter adulthood or as they navigate life as young people, they're watching us. And taking those moments for your own self-care um, gives them the ability to do that later, currently in their own lives, and then later on, because you can't tell someone to do something when you, in fact, are not doing it.
No, that's true, right? Like holding ourselves accountable, right? Holding ourselves accountable for the things that we ask, like I keep saying our children, like I have kids, I have no kids, but the children of the community, right? Um, asking children to do certain things, to be a certain way, but we're not necessarily emulating that ourselves, or we're not necessarily kind of showing them that, I may not be like this today, but I'm striving to continue to be like that, and that's okay too, because that's also another factor where it's like, oh well, I'm not like this now, so I can't do it, right? And it's like, well, you may not be able to do it today, but you may be able to do it tomorrow. So that's also like really important as well. So I'm going to head on over to the next question. We actually have a couple of questions that are in our comment section we'll come back to towards the end, because I really want to get through some of the stuff that we have selected here. So we actually talked a little bit about this for our fourth question. Do you think technology has a role in how we process emotions, i.e. interacting with our peers? So let me see who would like to go first. I'm in like,
I'll
yeah,
go,
Panine.
just because my internet is working now. So I think that children have a very emotional connection to technology, and because it's a huge part of their world, and I think it's also helping them express themselves. So one of the things I noticed with my own children, especially last year when the pandemic started, it was their way of connection, and it still is, but I think because technology is being used a lot more for education, they're spending more time in that world of talking to my peers throughout the day. That really wasn't the case in April and May. So I think we have to be careful with what that means, and what are the ways that they're expressing themselves, and who are they expressing themselves to. So it's kind of like we always connecting with them to make sure that the emotion that they have to attach to technology is rational, and that it's not connecting them to, especially when we think about elementary school and middle school, it's not connecting them to worlds that are really all students, worlds that they don't need to be exposed to, because they're spending a lot of time in front of a screen. And that means different things for different students, depending on, who their friends are, what are their interests, what social media platforms do they use? What do they like to listen to? Like, I know my daughter is into theater, so there's a lot of stuff that I gotta like listen into and say, yeah, I know you like theater, but that right there, that's not cool. We're not doing that. So, really being in tune with that, but also valuing that it's something so important to them. And similar to just thinking about the last pandemic, a person that may have been alive during that time may be 90 years old now, but the tools that we have today are just so different than then, right? So I'm personally, as a school administrator, grateful for the technology that we have. It's allowed us to reach our students and our families in ways that we couldn't have even like 20 years ago, right? So just continuing to have conversations about the technology, its uses, and we know you love it, and we don't want to take it away from you, but you got to know how to use it well, and really as adults monitoring that.
Thank you so much, Hanini, right? Because like a lot of the things that we talked about, right, is involving like balance, right? And with this pandemic, that balance has shifted in a lot of ways. Like the balance of how much time they spend with technology as opposed to after technology, right? Where it's like before the pandemic, it's like, okay, you only get this much time on your tablet or your laptop or your computer. But now, because everything that they need in order to interact, to go to school, even for instance, for us to go to work, right, is all on those devices that we attempted to pull them away from pre-COVID, right? So it's like the balance has most certainly shifted around when it comes to that. Does anybody else want to talk a little bit about technology and processing emotions and stuff like that with school-age children or adolescents? I'll pick on one of you guys like they do in school. Heather.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's already been said. I think, in the era of COVID, I think some of it is the notion that Zoom all bad, WebEx horrible. And I think obviously young people are spending a ton of time on all of these platforms, and it can be draining. But exactly. I mean, in 1918, there would have been no way to continue on in some of the ways that we've been able to continue on. We just wouldn't have been able. Well, we weren't able to do it. Now we wouldn't have been able to do it. We weren't able to do it. And thinking about some of where we are now in terms of being able to communicate and even being able to articulate. I mean, 100 years ago, we wouldn't have known about all the variants that are in existence because we wouldn't have been able to communicate with each other that, hey, the UK variant's coming your way, and hey, there's a Brazil variant. So I think thinking about the ways that technology has helped in this process, I think is important, but in the same vein, how young people are interacting with each other, and the modality by which they're doing that has become very much screen-like. So finding a happy balance between what technology has been able to do for us in terms of the gains that we've made and the ability to connect with each other and make the world more accessible to billions of people, coupling that with the balance of I just did an event, National Day of Unplugging, and we basically it was a 24-hour event where you just sort of got off your phones, got off everything, and just kind of read a book or took a walk or decompressed, meditated. And that's important. It was that day. It was hard for a lot of people that we worked with to do it. And I saw several people sneaking their cell phone every once in a while to answer text. But being able to do that and to unplug is crucial in this time.
That's really important, right? Because like we were all just talking about, right? Like it's become like the central system that we utilize everything in. So having to find other sources of entertainment or knowledge or different things like that, right? Is like, oh, we'll just Google it. Oh, we'll just go to YouTube. Oh, we'll just, we'll go here. We'll go to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, everything to obtain information and knowledge when before we got all this fancy stuff with the technology, right? Because I am that weird in between where I'm old and young, right? Where I do remember having the dial-up internet, where I do remembering just reading books was a very normal thing. Having a giant library of different stuff was a normal thing to have, and engaging in different activities, engaging with stuff in imagination is completely different as opposed to now where it's everything is technology centered when it comes down to not just knowledge, but also entertainment. So as we segue into our next part of this conversation, right, is also talking about like a little bit of like resiliency, right? So like resiliency is like the capacity to recover quickly from like difficulties, toughness, you know, adversity, right? To be like resilient, like, you know, we can get through it. And I think for a lot of people throughout this pandemic, they've had their resiliency tested, right? They've had their ability to get through this tough time because a lot of it was unknown, and still certain parts are unknown, and trying to accept it as a new normal is also part of like that resiliency as well. So as we get into the next question, right, in what way are you helping this age group with like resilience, like with school age children and adolescents? Like what ways are you guys, you know, as community members, as, you know, educators, as mental health professionals, how are you guys helping this age group with resilience? Yep, Heather, you're muted.
This is
There you
my
go.
ukulele. That's basically what I can play right now. But we're doing ukulele lessons with our students. I never played the ukulele. I play the piano. So I did piano lessons for 10 years, and I still play the piano now. So I love music, and I'm a music person. But I never played a string instrument before. And I purchased this ukulele on Amazon to support the students that are in the ukulele class. And we're in class 3 with the ukulele. And we learned how to play. We're learning how to play Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It's kind of difficult. But my point of that is the students in the ukulele class, they know nothing about the ukulele either. And some of them were very trepidatious about doing this, something they never did before, never tried it before, didn't think they could be musicians. But, you know, I said, just try it. It's we're in COVID. Why not? Grit, resilience, determination, falling down 9 times, getting up 10 times. Those are the things that make us who we are. Not all the successes that we have in life, but the ability to try something, for it to not work out, and either try it again or try something else. That's, you know, a huge part of how we learn. So that's what I've been doing during this try. And in the vein of modeling, I didn't just say to these young people, go play the ukulele, not, you know, have a good time. I got my own. I'm not great at it so far, but I'm going to keep practicing at least half an hour a day, maybe an hour a day, get up to that. And then I will model for them that, you know, this is something that they can try. And even if I'm not great at it, I'm going to keep at it. So grit, resilience, determination, it's kind of everything.
Thank you for mentioning, for talking about that, right? Because like, right, we were just talking about before, like modeling after, right? Showing them like, okay, well, this is a tough time for everybody, but in all different types of ways, right? So if this is something that you want to try to learn and try to do, we can do this together. And I can show you that I'm struggling just as much to try to learn, you know, in the case of Heather, like with the ukulele, right? I know nothing about the ukulele. You know nothing about the ukulele. We're going to learn something about the ukulele together. And that's also a part of like kind of where the community comes in as well when it comes down to resiliency. Tanisha?
What I was going to add is that during COVID, what I have had, you know, when I see pictures of other epidemics and other circumstances, whether it be, you know, we talked about 1918, 1919, or, you know, circumstances prior, is that being a human being is this fragile state, literally on this massive ball or ellipse, or, you know, whatever. word is appropriate, right? And that is loaded with fragility. It's loaded with circumstances that are beyond our control. And I think that there was we had a really good run where we didn't have to worry about things, and so some of us may have taken a lot for granted, but we have to understand that this is a part of the human condition. And so maybe in our short lives, we've never experienced anything this arduous, but being alive and being a human being comes with ebbs and flows, ups and downs. Some days with, some years going to be plateaus or whatever. So in order to create happiness, in order to create acceptance, we have to accept, we have to know that some things are going to happen that aren't necessarily always happy, happy, joy, joy. I'm a 90, came of age in the 90s, so I'm all happy, happy, joy, joy. If you guys don't know that reference, it's Ren and Stimpy. And so we actually have a lot of expectation that everything is going to go exactly the way we want it to be, and we're always going to be in control. And that's what gets people very anxious. That's what creates a lot of unhappiness. And so I think developing resiliency is about understanding that sometimes um, you're not going to know what tomorrow brings, and you still will be okay. And so developing in your family structure the ability to deal with those things. I remember saying once, we actually as a family faced a lot of tragedy all in one very small amount of time. And I remember one instance where my middle daughter was going through something, and I said to her, because that's like a whole that's a whole phrase that young people say. They say, "But did you die?" Like that was literally, that's a phrase that young people say, "Did you die?" And so because I didn't have the language to deal with what was happening, um, that was how I responded to my child. And I was like, Tanisha, what did you just say to her? And then I had to pause and say, you know what? We actually experience a lot of loss in the recent times, and sometimes people even do die. We still have to deal with all of this because death is a part of life if you're a human being. There's all these things that are a part of existing. So tragedy and triumph and happy times, that's all a part of what, to love someone means that you might lose them. It could be suddenly, it could be to be a person that has a nose and eyes and a mouth means that you could contract a communicable disease, right? And so in order for our children to be able to deal with all of that, we have to like put in them these realistic expectations. And some people might say, but that's a lot for a child, but it's reality. Like, what child hasn't had to deal with the loss of their grandparent? What child hasn't had, like, all of these things are happening to them. And then, as I'm looking at the educators in this space, if you lose your grandparent, that doesn't mean that you're exempt from the standardized testing that year. You still have to show up in spring and take those exams. There's not an opt out for I lost my grandparent. So it's like this constant existing where you're dealing with the ebbs and flows of life. And if you do that successfully as a parent, you actually build the muscle for children to do the same thing, because life is never going to be just about good times. And so how you deal with the tragedy might be the understanding and the knowing of how that happens during the plateaus. We have this opportunity during plateaus to develop muscle, because I would love to tell my children that we'll never face tragedy, but that's just not true. It's not true. So to develop resiliency, I have to model for them, and I have to let them know that life is fragile. People are going to lose jobs. There's going to be car accidents. If you're driving a car, it could be a car accident. You know what I mean? If you have legs, you could lose your ability to walk. Like all of that comes with being human. And so building the muscle in them to understand that none of us are entitled to the life that we have right now, and to actually be grateful. Like you can actually build the muscle to see your blessings. If I'm experiencing my joy and my blessings regularly, when those bad things happen, I'm like, well, listen, 80 days where sunshine, today it's raining. And I can rain better because I literally was immersed in joy during those sunny days. So, like, that's my answer. And that's what I tell my kids. Sometimes they laugh at me and they make fun of me, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to that.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective, Tanisha, because going again, like resiliency and even going back to like, because burnout is very similar to that in certain ways, right? Because it's like if we get too resilient, you know, we can burn ourselves out, right? Because we're like, oh, well, we just have to keep going through it. And then the opposite is like, if we aren't resilient at all, like we cripple ourselves to a certain degree where we're unable to function, we're unable to go about things and interact and attempt to live our lives. So it's like, again, segue and keep going right back to like that balance, you know. And Haneen, you wanted to mention something?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what Tanisha was saying around, you know, these are life skills, right? We're teaching kids how to be able to assess where they are, be able to communicate how they feel, hear other people's communication around the things that are happening that make them feel sad or make that or kind of bring them down in different ways. And I think it's important when we think about resilience that, you know, for me as a Muslim woman, bringing my faith into that and highlighting for my children that, you know, here's this world that was created, right? And I didn't create it, you didn't create it. We believe in this higher power, and we believe in the things that we read in scripture, right? And the things that we read in the Quran and whatever your belief is, right? But making sure that they understand that the world is functioning the way it was intended to function, and we are learning how to deal with that world. And there are people that can support you through those feelings, but we're going to come out on the other side, right? In the way that we are intended to come out on the other side, whether we're changed in terms of how we interact, what we believe, how we think. But we're teaching kids that these things happen, and you can choose to react this way, or you can choose to react this way. It kind of reminds me of a training that we did in District 31, TCIS, right? And we had a group of parents that were trained, a lot of teachers and administrators were trained, and it was like taking a moment to pause and to say to a child that was either really upset or, you know, needed to come down in terms of their temperament so that they can tell you why they're so very upset. And taking that break and saying, well, I know exactly how you feel because I would feel angry, or I would feel sad, or I would feel heartbroken by X. Now, what are we going to do about that, right? What are the steps that we're going to take? Is there a need for mental health, right? Is there a need to create some spaces for students to get therapy or to think about how they express themselves? And I think one of the other things that as a parent I've tried this year, I've tried so much because it's been such an interesting year. But one of the things I've tried this year is to meet them where they are. So like my son is really into these online games, and we'll sit there and we'll play with him. Like, what are you playing? Teach us. We lose all the time. All the time we lose. Or with my daughter, like I'll sit down and she likes these anime cartoon things, and I really try to pay attention and follow along, but I'm lost at the end. But it's creating that instead of them coming to us going to them and engaging in the things that they like, because then you have some more to talk about. And I think one of the most important things when we think about resilience is the open communication, because we need to hear what they're thinking. You know, we need to know, especially when you think about mental health, we need as parents to be as connected as possible to our children, to know if they're having thoughts that are really alarming, and then getting them the help that they need. So those are the things that come up, really coming to them and trying to, remember what it was like as a child. And we didn't live through a pandemic. And I say to my teachers all the time, like, you can't know how they feel just as much as I don't know how you feel, because I've never taught in a pandemic and you've never been a child in a pandemic, right? So let's always keep an open mind, and let's try to support them and support each other in the best ways that we can.
Shukran, Haneen, for mentioning that and saying those things, because it is important to take the step forward instead of always expecting like the child to come to us, right? Because like the idea is like, oh, my child, hypothetically, if I'm a parent, right? Like, my child's gonna come to me when they have an issue, right? My child's gonna come to me when they're sad, when they're angry, and stuff like that. And depending on their age, they may not come to you at all for anything, because they may come to their friends or their teachers or other people that they feel is like a source of support and stuff like that. So if you coming to them shows one, okay, I'm trying to pay attention to you, I'm trying to help you build something, I'm trying to help support you in some type of way during this entire thing. And you're right, I don't know what it's like to be a teacher per se during the pandemic. I have like a glimpse of it as an educator to a certain extent, but like not in of having lesson plans and doing all those things, right? Just the same as like I don't know what it feels like to be, a kid in middle school or elementary school or high school trying to go through the pandemic. I know it's like to be a grad student going through the pandemic, and it's much, much different, in comparison to, because there's different ways that our minds are working, different things that are important to us, different ways that we live our lives, and trying to come to the terms of like, okay, this is something that's happening, and this is something that I have to attempt to try my best to get through, in hopes that it is not necessarily as difficult as it is right now. Right. So you guys all mentioned some really, really great points. I'm just going to move on over to our last question before we do our Q&A, because we did have a couple of questions. Yes, Heather, you want to mention something?
I just want to add something really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to something Tanisha said, which, I mean, I always knew she was a super brilliant person, but, she just has kind of like knocked it out the park tonight. And it's actually genius what she just said, because the question that we have, question number 5, in what way are you helping this age group with resilience? It assumes that there's something that people should be surprised by that then they have to overcome because it's shocking and surprising and, so forth. But and this may be just the way I live my life, but when I live my life, and I say this to my students all the time, you should live your life expecting nothing, because you're not owed anything. Life owes you nothing, and you should not expect life to give you anything. Nor should you have expectation necessarily that life is going to be a certain kind of way. Life just is. Life is what you get. That's it. And so I think maybe we've done a disservice to our children, because I think one of the things, and more so I think even than resilience, is teaching people acceptance, and teaching people to really own what they receive and then work with that. Because I think when we look at it as grit and resilience, which I actually like gritty people, I'd like to think that I'm pretty gritty. I love resilience, because there are certain, the pandemic, people that can sort of like overcome this, that is resilience. But the notion that somehow life is supposed to be a certain way, and that way it's supposed to be fabulous and wonderful and rosy 24/7, that's just not reality. And so I think to the extent that we help young people to learn from what you receive and then to work with that, and to do what you need to do, get the help you need to get the support you need to get from what life is handing you, I think maybe we need to do a better job teaching them that. But life really doesn't owe you anything. It's nothing is promised to you, except whatever comes in the next moment. That's it. So I love that. And I just had to say that I think I think we really need to reflect on that and how we're imparting that on young people. So Tanisha, I hope I adequately sort of captured, because I really appreciated what you said. And I've been thinking about that for a long time. And I do say to my students all the time, life owes you nothing, because it doesn't. It's all life owes you is whatever's coming 2 seconds from now. And that's just what it's going to be.
Thank you so much, Heather. Right, because like I say this because I'm talking to myself first and foremost, because I'm a big planner, and when things don't go to plan, I have like a tiny meltdown, right? Because we think like, okay, if I do this, this is what the outcome will be, right? And sometimes it's like that, and then sometimes it's not, and then when it's not, it's like, well, how could this be? I did this, I did that. This is supposed to happen, and that's supposed to think, this whole pandemic has showed us that whatever plans we had for that year and even for this year went out the window. Whoever graduated in 2020 didn't really have a real graduation. They just looked at the screen, maybe waved, or just had their name go across a slideshow. For people who wanted to go to prom, same thing. For people who wanted to have their family reunions that they might have every year, same exact thing. Restrictions on travel, wanting to go to certain places, maybe want to travel the world, climb Mount Everest, whatever, all those things went out of the window. Even having their first day at experiencing college in the fall, right? Being able to have that experience walking on their campus and different things like that. Like, what we think of as like momentum times and in our year, because like, yeah, I'm going to plan this, I'm going to plan that. And all these different things went swoosh. They went out the window, and being able to accept that can be very difficult, even for us as adults, accepting that, especially because it was with a lot of questioning, a lot of confusion that came in part with this whole entire pandemic of, well, we'll go back to normal in 3 months, 6 months, a year. And time just keeps pushing and pushing. So it does create like a lot of like anxiousness, as well as like, okay, well, should I plan anything? Because what if I plan something and it's like, well, it's okay for us to be outside as long as it's 6 feet and we wear a mask, but then something happens and it's like, well, that went out the window. And I think like my little bit tidbit before we go to our last question is that, still make plans, but be okay with adjusting them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly.
Like, and I'm saying this first and foremost to myself, dear audience, because I am very much so that person that'll be like, but I planned all this stuff. I've been working so hard and all this stuff, and it's like it doesn't happen, and I'm like, like I start like having this little internal screaming because I'm like, why isn't this working? And again, there's nothing wrong with planning, but just being okay with having adjustments. And I'm going to just go to our next question, and then we'll have our quick Q&A. So how can the community support children and adolescents during this time? I know Dr. Ray had to leave because he had another event to speak at. So I want to just say thank you really quickly to Dr. Raymond Brock Murray. He got to step out. So Heather, Tanisha, whatever one of you guys, if you want to touch upon our last question that we have set up. Haneen as well, and whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of all this sorts of come full circle, right? So we talked about the family structure and family dynamics. That's critical in terms of cluing into your children and what their needs are. Planning is critical. I like to plan. I do. I like planning. I think planning is wonderful. So, I don't think anybody here is saying, it's a free for all out there. Do what you want to do. Live your best life however you want to. All loosey goosey. No, I think planning is important, but being able to be nimble, being able to shift, knowing that things may not go the way you plan them, which, by the way, sometimes when things don't go the way they're planned, the incredibleness that comes out of that it's unimaginable. I mean, it's legitimately unimaginable because you can't imagine it because you've been planning so long. And sometimes you just need to sit in that. So that, and then the final thing I'd say was just there's lots of resources out there on Staten Island in terms of community organizations. You know, we've talked about several organizations that are doing interesting work and that have programming. Support your children. You know, if your children want to do something, if they, you know, want to do a program, if they want to try something, support them. It's a difficult time. And if a child is out there saying, you know, hey mom, hey dad, I'd like to do this free program that involves whatever, try to get them online, get them to it. Be supportive of them, because children remember those things. They really do. They remember that you didn't take them to this. They remember that they weren't able to do that. They remember these things. In a time that's so difficult, try to be there for them in that way. So
Thank you so much, Heather. Hanita, I think I saw you take your mic off real quick.
Yes, thank you. I think that, you know, in general, we're a village, right? So there's the school, there's the home, there's the family, there's the friends, there's who lives next door, there's all of these people in children's lives, right? And I think it's really important that we come together for that shared goal and focus around, you know, what's good for kids and how we can support them through that path. I think it's really important, again, to just be in tune, right? Create opportunities that will allow your children to engage with you more. Like what's happening in the community, right? What programs are there? Exactly what I was thinking as well, in terms of, and then if there's things, and if you're not finding the thing that your child wants to do, create a group, you know, connect with people whose children like those things, and create a group of kids that like to play particular games or do particular things. I know for me, as a Muslim woman, just bringing my faith back into it, I've been really conscious about creating like a community of people that look like us and celebrate holidays the way we do, practice faith the way we do, because I wanted my children to not feel like they were so different, because growing up I felt that way, and that wasn't a good feeling, right? And so how do we expose them to diverse communities while still saying, you know, here's a cohort of people that we know, that we associate with, that we spend time with, and they know certain things about your life and the way that you can, you know, what's important to you and what's important to your family. So community is powerful, and it really builds children up, and it's important to always create that community for your child, and just continue to think, and for yourself too. So as parents, don't isolate yourself. And I know I'm saying this within COVID, but isolate, you know, in terms of not talking to anyone or not interacting with anyone. And there's a lot of fear out there, right? And we totally understand the fear, but connect with people on social media, connect by phone, create opportunities for Zoom calls with family. You know, and I know I was talking to someone in my school building the other day, and he said, you know, we celebrated Passover and we had our family on Zoom that we usually don't even see for Passover. We never usually see them because they live in another state. So although we've been through a really difficult school year, good comes from everything. There's some good that comes. We were intended to go through this school year, right? And this year, and I think our children picked up skills that they might not have picked up in the classroom, right? Whether it's skills around technology, or even, like, I keep saying that our children are like the collaborative processes of how they're getting work done with their peers and the things we're doing. Those are things that elementary and middle school students learned, but it wasn't used to this level, right? So they picked up skills, and we picked up skills, and it's just important to continue to grow and build a community around yourself and your family.
Thank you so much, Sister Haneen, for talking about that point, right? Like that, just building up like the community, talking about the village, right? Like even with our saying, right, the community is our priority, right? That, you know, that our slogan, right? And that's it means a lot, and it takes a lot, because again, without these different community resources, without people in the community actively trying to participate and engage with one another, it does become very isolative. It does become very difficult for us to engage with one another or know which resources to utilize or seek out or maybe missing within our communities that our children need in order to support them. Tanisha, would you like to touch upon anything?
I think I just want to say that I I think we need to really like analyze this whole conversation around learning loss and projecting onto our children that this time period is a time period where they have to keep up. Um, that's really like bothersome to me because I think about what would it be like if an 18-year-old actually graduated, or a 10-year-old actually like spent like got some of what they learned maybe in just fifth grade across 2 years. Conversations with some people, you might think to yourself, wow, like, you know what I mean? And so it's like, where is this concept of falling behind coming from, as if you can't spread content across 2 to 3 years? Like I've not spoken to a sixth grader who shows up as if they only could like, oh wow, I know that this person has finished sixth grade because of their conversation, and then met up with an 11th grader and said, oh wow, the conversation that that 11th grader is having is unique to 11th graders. That concept is really drilled down in our education system, and I would like to challenge the fact that it's absolutely and totally false, and that if you speak to people that their range of knowledge, when a lot of people, I mean, I'm a black woman in the sense of 1619 black woman, right? So I don't have that immigration experience, but some people have grandparents that are immigrants, that or people who come from different backgrounds who will tell you that they only had a sixth grade, they were still very successful. So this concept of learning loss I find to be extraordinarily troublesome, because it means that we're putting students in a space where they have to feel like they're behind because they lived through a year of a pandemic. How could you be behind? That's horrible. And it really upsets me and it bothers me because it causes stress for students and it causes stress for families that doesn't need to exist. That I absolutely can assure you that you can get students to where they need to be
Mhm.
in a place of experiencing academia where they don't have to feel like they're behind. Are you kidding me? And so, what I would say as a community is advocate for our children and don't let people who are somehow tied to oppressive education system that somehow makes it so that their checks and balances are in place. Fight for your kids. Stand up for your
Mhm.
children. If your kids are getting bad marks and they never got bad marks before, tell everybody to pause. That's a term that I learned from young children. Pause. Knock it off. Stop it. There's no reason why you have to make these children feel stressed. Stress. Why should a third grader, a fourth grader, a fifth grader, an eighth grader ever use the term stress? For learning,
Mhm.
have you ever seen a child try to do a skateboard trick? They'll hurt themselves to mastery, but they will never tell you that they're stressed out. Have you ever seen a child try to learn how to dribble? They will exhaust themselves, but they will never use the term stress. They are working on something that means something to them. So stand up for your children. Do not let this education system, which is ultimately in a lot of spaces called the school to prison pipeline, stress your kids out. Make sure that your children are feeling joy. Make sure that they are immersed in things that are important to them. And do not let you make you feel that there's any standardization, because I have met brilliant people who have basically abandon our school system because it doesn't acknowledge brilliancy except in the one way that they feel that it's so this is a time where we can say, you know what, the school system was broken before, so let's not be trying to get back to the old way, but let's use this opportunity to smash some of the things that we know were wrong. So I don't want to hear people who love children using the terminology learning loss. They're not falling behind, they're surviving a global pandemic. All I want to see is children smiling. And if you have the nerve to say that these kids are behind, shame on you. Shame on you. When these kids, I have had families lose both grandparents. How could you tell a kid who lost grandparents that they're behind? On what? ABCs? I could teach. We have met people who were illiterate in their 30s who have learned how to read. How could you be behind?
Mhm.
Stop it. Knock it off. How about that? That's what our community can do to support children and adolescents. Knock it off and support these young people and their survival. You survive as an adult, and these kids don't have to live up to your ridiculous expectations, because guess what? If I teach a child in 8th grade instead of 7th grade about American history, they're still going to know American history. And if someone graduates at 19 instead of 18, they're going to be fine. And that goes back to our conversation about resiliency. We need to stop imposing these ridiculous standards on young people and these ridiculous timelines on young people. I have seen 7-year-olds that didn't learn how to read just pop. And all of a sudden, they learned in 2 months what I couldn't teach them in 6 months. So stop it. Stop it, because you wouldn't like it if it was done to you. You wouldn't like it if someone gave you a report card. If I came to your job and gave you an assignment and told you that you had to do an assignment every day, you wouldn't like it as an adult. So why are you doing this to 6th graders and 7th graders and 8th graders? Stop it and fight for these kids' joy. They're understanding that we survive and we're connected, and that they want to play basketball and that they want to laugh. There's no joy in feeling like you're behind. That's ridiculous. Stop. If you want to help as a community to support children and adolescents, get rid of the terminology learning loss. It's harmful. It's not helpful. There's no joy in that. And you're not meaning to do anything for anyone but yourselves as adults in this system. And that's
Mhm.
coming from me as a parent. That's coming from me as a activist, and that's coming from me as a community member. We don't need this. It's not helpful.
Oh,
Just
wow.
wow.
Wow. Yeah, we
Wow,
both, everyone's just like,
Tanisha.
wow.
Yeah.
And I know, honey, you have something to add on to that, because I just saw your mic off like a second ago. But I do
Yeah.
want to add on really quickly to Tanisha's points that she made, right? About how this is it's a very stressful time, right, for everyone. And to make it more stressful with the way that the school system can be, right, it doesn't help, right? Because I like, for instance, I work as an educator at Snug Harbor, and for my supervisor, right, she was talking about how one of her elementary school age kids were stressing out because they could not get onto Zoom to attend class, not do an assignment, but to attend class, and that this elementary school kid was stressing out. And they lose the word stress because they're like, I'm going to miss class. I don't want to miss material. I'm going to miss everything. I'm going to fall behind. And then I'm going to have to catch up with this with homework, and using terminology that I would use as a grad student who pays for all their classes. So if I miss something, that's my dime, going down the toilet. But, using these words of stress when it should be fun to learn these things. It shouldn't be a stressful time. It should be something that's fun for them to learn, and to be able to come back to you as parents, be like, hey, guess what I learned today? Blah, 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 blah. That is them, comprehending and utilizing the material that they have had in school, is them learning it, enjoying what they learned to the point that they want to share it with those around them. That's them comprehending and assessing those types of things. And I'm going to hand it over to Haney, our resident person on education and stuff right now in the Congo.
Thank you, thank you. And first, I have to say, Tanisha, wow, just the message is just. I think you articulated what a lot of teachers, what a lot of parents are feeling, especially as we now embark on this time where, New York State testing, right, over the next 4 weeks, right? What does that mean and what's that about and how is it useful for my child? So I guess I want to say two things. The first thing is, as a principal, um, I'm saying push your child's school, push their thinking, engage with them, have conversations, because I think, like Tanisha said, there's this system, and based on the system, certain things are happening and certain things are being said in comments like, learning loss and how do we make up for this and how do we make up for that? And really, what we're learning is things have to change, right? We're learning that students need experiences. We're learning that students need outlets. We're learning that students need different tools to show their learning, right? We have kids that weren't performing as well in classrooms that are flourishing on a virtual class, right? Because there's something that wasn't working for them. So as we're learning that, I think it's really important that families know that they have an immense amount of power, right? I had a parent ask me, well, I don't like this, that this is happening. What do I do? And what I said is make your voice heard. Reach out to your political, who's in charge of the community? Who are the political people that we can reach out to? Reach out to the mayor's office. Attend town halls that they're doing for the Department of Education and make your voice heard. Send emails, send letters, because you are your child's advocate first and foremost. It's about their well-being, and I really appreciate this idea of a shift and not going back to the norm, because sometimes when we look at systems and we don't like the outcomes of the system and we're trying to to do these quick edits to make it better, that's not good enough because the system is doing what it's intended to do. So be vocal. And I just, as a principal, I say those conversations I have with families where they push my thinking are the conversations that are most impactful. And so have conversations with the leadership of your school communities and let them know how you're feeling and thinking, especially if children are walking away with, oh my God, I have to do this. This is so stressful. That should not be the response of a third grader. It should be joy. Learning should be enjoyable. We think about our elementary school students and how they connect to teachers. They should be having fun on these platforms. They should be experiences. And yes, are there times that they're completing tasks that they're not in love with? Yes, but they understand that it's part of this process and there is learning and not just kind of checking things off that have to be completed. Thank you, Tanisha. I mean, that was really powerful. I'm thinking about how do we take what you said and really get to using your statements to kind of empower our teachers, because our teachers are also feeling like, I'm in this box. How do I move around to make sure that learning is as engaging as possible?
Thank you so much, Sister Honey. And it's good to get from your perspective as well, right? Because you're a principal, right, of a school, so like you see from kind of like a higher perspective of what goes on with the teachers, what goes on with the students, what their opinions and thoughts are, what's going on with the parents as well, which you just expressed. Like a lot of them have shared some of the things that Tanisha has talked about, right? Some of the things that we've all talked about throughout this entire time with our topic about, like, COVID-19, school-age children, adolescents, about of what that struggle is, right? Is my child really learning anything during this time, or are they just absorbing information and spitting it back onto a test paper, right? As myself as a college student, that was something I know I did a lot. Certain classes I enjoyed more because I had more engagement from my professors. So there's certain things that I keep till this day, right? And then there's certain things that I know I learned, and I look at some of the papers I find when I clean up, and I'm like, oh, well, I forgot I wrote this paper about this thing. That I don't remember anything, about it. And it's because I absorbed it to just spit it back out again. I didn't absorb it to retain it. So, you guys, and I want to, we're not done, because I just want to talk about some of the things that the comments, people in the comment section has talked about and spoke on. But I do really want to thank you guys at this point for coming on here, taking the time to educate myself, educate our audience, and those who will watch it after our live is finished, about this topic, because it's really important, because it's a whole school year, right? It's a whole school year that they're going through with, back and forth between being in school, not in school, COVID cases rising, COVID cases falling. We now have the vaccine, so many different components that would affect their overall well-being and how they interact and how they engage, and what the concept is of interaction, right? Like I over the week during like the small spring break that some of them had, right? I had little kids, kindergartners, first graders, where for them it was very normal for them to wear their mask and make sure that they were certain distance apart. But for the kids that were a little bit older, that did have a little more of a social interaction, they would forget that that's something that they have to do, or that they have to be certain distance apart. So it's like there is a difference of those who have kind of grown up and this is their norm, and those who had to make this into their norm and adapt to those types of things. So I'm going to just take off this quick banner. So I do want to just talk about some of the questions really quickly before we sign off, and also some of the comments that we had through our whole conversation, because we had a very chatty comment section, which is always great. So one of the people in our comment section had talked about that I have noticed those who thrived in person are struggling with virtual classes, right? I know for myself, who thrives better in person has struggled last year with my final semester of college. So for school age students, I can only imagine how hard it's been for them, right? So this is an adult saying, like, I struggled as a college student in my last semester with virtual classes. I can't even imagine how, and I'm going to change the format a little bit so it's a little bit more inclusive, right? How they interacted with that shift, right? Being home all the time, right? Because 8 hours out of the day, they're not with mom, they're not with dad, they're not with their siblings, they're with a whole bunch of other people, but now they're reassessing how they interact and how they learn, right? Some households didn't have multiple computers or tablets, having to learn how to share that space. And some of them didn't get laptops or computers from school. That in of itself is very, very difficult, as opposed to, like, let's say an adult who already maybe have had a laptop as a college student, or may have had access to certain things to be able to engage in that way. So I don't know if anyone wants to touch upon that really quickly, because we just have 2 more comments.
Yeah, I will. I teach at the college level, and again, Tanisha, I said it before, and then I just like additionally amazing what you said, and I totally agree with all of it. So I teach college students, and it's very interesting because, again, there's something going on with people thinking about COVID. And my area is public health law. So before COVID happened, I was teaching about the 1918 flu, and that's my area. I teach public health. And I find something really fascinating starting to happen, and I'm sure it will happen more the further we get away from the pre-COVID era, which is, it's almost like everything was super rosy and happy in 2019. No one had any problems. It was all amazing. Like, why can't we just go back to that? Because it was the good old days of a year and a half ago, and everybody was living the great life. And I mean, if we just think about just school, just in school age children, a lot of people were not. I mean, one of the big things we were talking about in 2019 was bullying, right? And students going to school being terrified. And so, there are students now who have spent a year or more not being terrified every day when they wake up, and not, thinking, oh, this is going to be day 800 in a row that I get beaten up at school. Right. So I think this sort of like revisionist history of, 2019 was the best year in the lives of all 7 billion people on the planet. And it couldn't be any better for us. Well, that's just not true. So again, I think something where when we go in the post-COVID era, we have to bring everybody along, or as many people as we can, because a whole lot of people were left behind in 2019 when we were there. And those people are still looking back at 2019 saying, well, everybody's wishing for, it's like people that are wishing for the good old days of like the 1950s. And then you have Black people that are like, wait, hold up. It's not my good old days. Or like the 1860s, that was even worse, right? So, and everybody's not looking at 2019 thinking it was wonderful for me. So I think we got to think about how we marry the people who, and there are some people who are doing well in terms of the technology aspect of some of this and the virtual aspect. How do we work with them to keep some of what's going on with them, coupled with people who are struggling mightily, not being in person and not having that, and then bring all of that to the post-COVID era so that we have more in the way of some justice for more people. And I would say if we can work on that, that's going to be more of a win than what we had on December 30th, 2019.
Thank you so much, Honey. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say that again. I urge you to be a voice for your child. So when your child is learning remotely, and I've had multiple conversations, as a school leader with my children's principals and assistant principals, because if something is not working for a child, it's not the child. Right. And I try to, in my conversations with teachers, when we talk about practice and we talk about what we ask kids to do, there's a line where we can say, well, the kids can't do A, B, and C, but we're not talking about what the kids can't do. What we're talking about is what we as adults are doing to make sure that kids have the opportunity to learn and can ultimately do A, B, and C. So what I would say is have those conversations with your child's administrators and make sure that they're being, because as administrators we can't be everywhere. We try. We give it a good try, and we're visiting classrooms remotely, and we're visiting classrooms in person, and we're addressing programming things, and we're addressing health issues, and there's a lot that's happening on every school level, right? So if there's something that's happening, if there's assignments that are being assigned in particular ways that's not serving your child, schools are being flexible, and schools should be able to address concerns for particular children in ways. And I can speak only for myself as a principal. If I speak to a parent and I say, personal, local, immediate, right? And a parent has a problem with something that's happening because a child is not able to access it, it is my job as a school leader to make sure that child can access it. It is the job of the teacher to make sure that child can access it. That is literally why we're there. And it's important that we continue to be voices for our children, because it's not the kids. And that's something that I'm personally sick about hearing. The kids can't, the kids can't, the kids can't. Yeah. That's not their job. They're children. Their job is to engage with what you're presenting, right? And if what you're presenting is not engaging, or there's a disconnect, or it's not meaningful to them. I remember during the pandemic, my daughter said to me, we're 3 months in the pandemic. I'm yet to have a teacher talk to me about COVID-19. Like there was no space around, and they knew COVID was happening and they referred to it, but they didn't create spaces of, and this is middle school, like they could understand that this is something that, how does it transfer and what's the rate? It could be engaged. It could have been brought into math in terms of numbers, right? It could have been brought into social studies in terms of what's happened in history similar to this, right? And science and they could write about it. And so I think that it's important that we continue to make our voices heard. And I think we've learned a lot from this era, right? And we've learned our limitations. We've learned that there are just things that are happening that are not serving all students. We've learned that we are in charge. Well, we knew that we were in charge of what happens for kids, but now we're having to do it virtually. So we need to be more prepared. And if you're watching your children's virtual classrooms, like the teachers have to be ready for what's happening, because it's like a box that's always on the teacher, right? So what does that preparation look like, and how are we making sure that there are supports? But again, I guess my advice for families across the board is speak up for your child, be that advocate, tell your school leaders what's happening that's not serving your child. And there should be an enormous amount of flexibility. And if there isn't, then there are other ways that parents can get support.
Can I just add one thing? I love that point that you just made. I say, so I'm routinely intrigued by the fact that I will get students telling me my class is one of the only classes that they talk about COVID in. Now, admittedly, I'm teaching a public health law class, so I'm not sure what else I would be talking about these days, but I actually don't understand how teachers are not incorporating COVID in facets of their class. So that's just intriguing and interesting to me, not in a good way. But the point that you made about the classroom responsibility, I say this to my students all the time. I have some colleagues who, in the pre-COVID days, they would not allow students to have laptops in their class, and I would say, why? They're like, oh, because they could be doing this. I was like, let me break something down for you, my friend. if I have a student in my classroom that thinks playing Tetris is more interesting or more scintillating or more helpful than listening to me, I have the problem. I got a problem. They don't have the problem because there's something I'm not doing, getting across, teaching in order to engage them in the material that I am presenting to them. And I really firmly believe that as an educator. And to the extent that, especially in this realm, we all have to be vigilant in terms of engaging students, making sure they have what they need, making sure that they have the technology to be able to learn. That's my responsibility as an educator. And to the extent that that doesn't happen, that's on me. So I'm glad that you said that because as educators, we need to own that.
Thank you so much, Sunny and Heather. Right, you both made really good points about because again, we're talking about school age children, so we talking about school, right? And we're talking about how the effects of what they're learning is important, right? Like they used to have it where it was like daily events or something like that when I was a kid, right? Like every day for social studies, we would talk about what's going on in the news for that day, right? And I don't know how often it is, and I know every school system is different, right? But this is something that was on the news every day for most of 2020, so having that as a conversation and having that conversation with children that can comprehend it, middle school children can comprehend it, even to a certain extent elementary school kids can comprehend it because they do understand that, okay, I have to wear a mask when I go outside, right? What does that mean? Right. So of course you're not going to explain to them the enzymes and how it, like all this other technical stuff, but you can explain like, okay, well, this is to keep us safe. This is, to try to protect us, this is to help us from getting sick, just like how you do anything else to help yourself from getting sick. Washing your hands, not going to sleep with wet hair, or, doing different things to make sure, wearing proper clothes when you go outside so you don't, get sick from the cold or don't have a heat stroke, or, different things like that are all fairly similar. They've already done or have gotten used to as, okay, these are the things I need to do to protect myself, right? And having the history for kids who are middle school or high school and even, college level, because I did have my professors for undergrad, we've never talked about anything that went on daily, but because I'm in grad school during the pandemic, we did talk a lot about that. That was a conversation. We did talk about the fatigue of being in the pandemic overall, and just how our learning spaces have changed, where I would normally, let's say myself or other people would normally be at a library or be at our schools trying to study and do homework. But now we're at home where there's different responsibilities, different things going on. You might have little siblings, messing around with your stuff, going in your room, different things like that affect your ability to learn. And it segues back to what Tanisha was talking about not really holding them too much accountable as if this was a regular time, regular year pre-2020, and just having that balance of like, okay, you know what, this is not a good time for you. This is not a good space for you to learn right now. And your teachers are just going to have to be okay with it and understand that. So I'm going to have our final remarks because we're about to hit our 2 hours because there's so much information. I know we could talk for days about it because it's so important. So any final remarks from our amazing panelists? Go. Oh no,
I just want to say thank you for including me in this conversation. I think it's important for us to have forums like this to really hear each other's thoughts. And when you hear someone else's thought, like as a principal, I connected to so many things that were said today. As a mother, I connected to so many kids, and it just builds our collective responses. I just want to say one of the things that I would like to leave our parents with is be as much in tune with your child's emotional well-being as you can, because you can't do anything if you're not emotionally and mentally well. You can't succeed on any level. And mental health is an important part of their development, their mental awareness of themselves and how they're feeling, and what that means for their success in life generally is just crucial. So, and you're gonna get, I don't know, or leave me alone, or why do you keep bothering me? Like, you're going to get those responses, and don't let those responses deter you, right? Because those comments may be cries for help. Those comments may be, we might need to get some other help in our homes or in our communities, because kids are not sharing with us as much as we would like them to, right? Especially as they get older into adolescence. So just stay in tune. They're going to try to push you away, but you're not going to be pushed away, and just continue to connect with them.
Thank you. Anybody else want to follow up after? Any final remarks, last words you want to give our audience?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really wonderful experience to be here with all of you. I hope it won't be the last time that we're all together. But I really want to thank you for inviting me. And the two last things I will say are, teachers as well have their own anxieties and their own stressors, and a lot with colleagues that I see that might be sort of doing certain things, or why are they doing this? Teachers are not immune either. And so I think for the teachers out there, you deserve to be able to get help and talk with people, and find resources for that as well. And you should. And if you feel that in a classroom setting, you're doing something that is kind of provoking certain reactions, definitely get the support that you need, because sometimes I think teachers can also create these structures and boxes and assignments and so forth, because they too are stressed about the unknown and worried about what will be, and that could be a coping mechanism for them in order to create a little bit more that is known for them. So I think that that's understandable, but needs to be addressed in the same way that we're talking about parents addressing their own anxiety. And then that's the last thing I would say would just be again, parents being able to be in tune with themselves, just like we were talking about, understanding what your children's needs are. Children's coping mechanisms are acting out. That's what they got, because they don't have some of the other things that we talked about. So to the extent that as a parent, you can understand that a good deal of this can be that acting out on the child, but they're responding to a very difficult situation. Being in tune with them and being able to really model that good mental health behavior we've been talking about is critical. So
Thank you, Heather. Tisha?
I would just hop right on to what Heather was saying in terms of teachers and what they have to deal with, and just remind everyone that many teachers are parents too, and so a lot of the teachers who are dealing with being positive for their students are also wrestling with their own children and how to support their own children while they're supporting their children. Like, many teachers, we call our children, our students, our kids, right? So you have your own children that you give birth to when you're supporting your students or your kids too. And again, going back into this understanding, a lot of the things that I heard early on is that teachers were seen as babysitters, and the concept of needing childcare doesn't mean that you're a babysitter. It means that the public needs you. Like you're a public servant. You provide a valuable service. So because children need to be with you doesn't mean that you're a babysitter. And it doesn't mean that it's 1000% academic either. Like we talk about social emotional learning. You know, when I do a workshop for adult educators and I ask them about their learning experiences, and I want to tell you 100% of the time, no one says anything about a learning objective or an aim or a lesson plan. They don't remember that stuff. No one remembers how they learn how to read. That doesn't mean that they don't need to learn how to read. That doesn't mean that instruction is important. But in the words of the great Maya Angelou, people don't remember what you say. They remember how you made them feel. So how I felt while you were teaching me all of those things, I don't remember the process of you teaching me those things, but I just know. One day I'm a avid poster on social media, so my kids don't know it, but I'm the reason why they know that 10 cents can be made by 2 nickels or a nickel and 5 pennies. They'll never remember that I taught them that, but they'll always know that from this day forward. Like literally, most of them came into my classroom today not knowing that, and forevermore they're gonna know it, and they're never gonna remember. They're gonna pass me in the supermarket, and they're not gonna be able to say, "Hey, you're the reason why I know how to make 10 cents." So the work that we do is way more important than that lesson plan. But we can't do it while kids are like air quotes, and I go back to that terminology stress. We had several students commit suicide. And when you think about a 10-year-old taking their life, like what could make a 10-year-old so hopeless that they would think that taking their life was their only option? Our role as parents, as educators, as adults in our society, as community members, is to protect them, right? So I don't want to get hokey, but we have that song, The Greatest Love of All, saying that I believe our children are the future. And so they need us to build that foundation and protect them and to create this insulation. And then we let them go like little mama birds and they fly out and they need the skills to sustain themselves and be successful. It's not about control. It's not about standardization. It's about realizing their genius. Every single one of our children have their own genius, and we have to. Part of what we give them is the social emotional muscle, so that they can deal with global pandemics. Like some of the things that we're dealing with right now, we're able to do it because someone poured into us, right? We are strong enough to live through right now because someone gave us the tools to get through. They didn't know, they didn't say, hey, these are the tools that you need to get through a global pandemic. But those of us who have gotten those of us who have dealt with unspeakable sadness and trauma. Some of us, the reason why we've been able to do that and then pour into, like, I'm looking at all four of you, and I know that you will not take credit, but we've all been connected this entire time, and we've come to these different conversations, and we've come to these different spaces, and a lot of us won't take a bow, and we won't take a pat on the back, but we've actually been the very fabric of our communities and what we actually need. And the reason why we've been able to do that is that someone along the way gave us the opportunity to build the muscle. So we have to be mindful that we're doing that for future generations.
I had to clap it up. For not even just Nisha, like all of you guys. You guys have taken the time out to talk about such an important topic that affects so many people, not just in Staten Island, not just in New York City, not just in New York State, but all across the country, across the world, about these issues that the children in our community are facing, these issues that our parents are facing, these issues that our teachers are facing, which at the end they all intersect and all interconnect with each other. So I just want to say thank you so much to you guys. You did an amazing job. I know I learned a lot. I know I gained a lot of information. I'm sure our audience has. They were chatting away in the comment section saying thank you a lot to you guys as you made your points throughout this conversation. Some people said snaps, you know, some people said thank you. And they're just really appreciative of all the things that you've said. And hopefully we'll see more comments later on once we sign off. So I just want to say thank you one more time, because there isn't enough thank yous I could possibly give you guys for the amount of knowledge and amount of just like creating a space, right, for us to have this type of conversation, and for parents, teachers, students even to feel like they've been heard and feel like they've been understood to a certain extent. So thank you guys so much, and thank you all to our audience, and we are signing off. Bye-bye.
Bye.